As we all know, generational trauma is something that's very prevalent within the Black community. And I'm sure each one of us has our own story about how a grandma or an auntie or some relative has explained how these curses can be passed down and how important it is that we, as the next generation, break off the cycles that they've been perpetuating. Now, I'm going to ask a question and you can answer in the comments. How many of you have really taken the time to reflect on what you've been told or personally singing about your lineage, about your own family? I believe it's universally accepted that the goal of the previous generation should be to build up the next one to be better, ensuring success and prosperity. Now, I'm sure some of you know this, but I have to ask, what happens when the trauma builds and festers and grows so big that it ends up causing wounds deep enough to scar a whole family for generations? That is where the topic of this video comes in. Meet the Malones. First, we got the grandparents, and for simplicity's sake, we're just going to refer to them as grandma and grandpa. Next, we have their kids, Eugene, Tessa, and Tareen. Eugene being the father of Chrisean, Tasiki, Latifah, all of them. Following that would be the people we're most familiar with. We have Chrisean, Latifah, Unique, Tessa, Tareen, and then we have Unique's kid, Tristan, and then we have Mookie, but then we also got Mikey and Chrisean Jr., and that's what we'll be focusing on today. Now, let's start with the grandpa. So the grandfather, as far as we know, is where this all started. It's reported, that he was a violent man. He would pull his wife out to the woods and beat her, and his actions had a profound impact on Eugene. Even his own daughters, they probably picked up some of those behaviors as well. And allegedly, he was having, full-on relationships with his two daughters, Tessa and Tareen. He even got one of them pregnant. And I'm sure his actions caused Eugene to be the way that he is, partially. Next, we'll move on to his wife, the grandma. So if anything, she was more of an enabler, as she was likely aware of all this dysfunction, but didn't do anything to stop it. And if anything, she was probably encouraging it. And this is where it gets weird. She was actually jealous of her daughters being sexually assaulted by Eugene, and even went as far as to put a hit out on one of her own because she was so jealous that Eugene was giving the daughter the attention instead of her. So much so that before she died, she tried to put a hit out on one of them. Eugene, her son, she offered to give him $10,000 if he were to kill her. Next, we'll be moving on to Tessa, Tareen, and Eugene. Tessa was the one that was impregnated by Eugene, and unfortunately, she felt so much shame and so much guilt about that she decided it would be best to take her own life. I saw somewhere that she had jumped in front of some train tracks. I'm not sure how true that is, but that, is the narrative that's being ran with. Now, if you remember earlier, I was talking about how the mother had, propositioned Eugene to kill one of her daughters. This is Tareen. Now, there isn't really too much to say about these two. We just don't hear too much from them, or we don't know too much about them as of right now. Next, we're going to talk about the father, Eugene, who we mentioned in the last video. He ended up following in his father's footsteps, almost exactly, continuing this cycle of abuse, not healing. He has an abusive history. It's documented. There's a documented history of his abusive behavior, including manipulation and violence towards his family members, causing him to be locked up until Chrisean was about 8. And his actions, especially towards his children, created this cycle of dysfunction and trauma that has affected his entire family. Everyone after him is fucked up because of him. So let's move on to the current generation. We have China, the oldest sister of Chrisean. She was the one who went live on social media and started exposing all the details, started spilling everything about the family trauma and to some of the stuff about Tristan, and kind of confirming what Chrisean was saying about Tasiki. She also shared that she herself was a victim of Eugene's abuse and says that Tasiki is the way that she is because Eugene was doing that, to Tasiki, and she was just trying to imitate what she saw. Next, we have Latifah, Chrisean's other older sister, and she's been accused, she has allegations from a couple people. Obviously, there's the one from Chrisean and the one from Tristan as well. And I'd say the big twist here is that he is saying that Chrisean is making up her story and that she was actually the one who was sexually abused, and that Chrisean is trying to spin this whole narrative because she is jealous of, Latifah kind of popping off and getting some fame now. And that's how this is snowballed into what it is now. I don't really believe that, just because of all of the different, sources that these allegations are coming from. It just doesn't seem like this is something that would be, created out of jealousy, because who does this really benefit? So we've got Chrisean Rock herself, whose allegations were like kind of the catalyst for this whole movement. She's the one that kind of put it. And she was basically saying that Latifah started playing house with her when she was around 7 years old, and that it went on for years after that. Her family is kind of seeing her as like a traitor right now for exposing the family secrets and kind of putting it all out there. And she also has confirmed that Tasiki did like weird stuff with Tristan. I've also heard her mention that Latifah's son, Mikey, sexually assaulted by someone on the father's side, like a father's cousin or something like that. And that's not the first time I've heard that allegation. So, that's just definitely the cycle, that curse finding its way through a different source. Next, we have Tessa, who was named after Eugene's sister. Both her and Terrain were named after Eugene's sisters. But Tessa was also accused of, inappropriate behavior by Tristan. Tristan basically says that she touched him inappropriately during his childhood, and she also has a weird case now. Next, we've got Terrain. According to China, Terrain's father, sexually assaulted her, and Terrain was aware of it but said nothing. And just for the record, they are half sisters, so they have different dads. But she herself has not been accused of touching anyone, so that, at least is good. She did make concerning Father's Day post a couple years ago before this all really went into the mainstream. And I'll put this up on screen so you can read it for yourself. I think it's pretty weird. There's some pretty weird stuff under there. I don't think that that's a typical relationship that a father and daughter should have. But if I'm wrong, let me know in the comments below. Next, we have one of the weirder ones. This is Chastity, and Tristan says that Chastity or Latifah, he says that he remembers. He doesn't remember which one. Making out with their uncle Mook. Now I think it's her because she calls herself, the female Mook. And Tristan alleges that she, sexually assaulted him as well. Yeah, definitely. If Tristan can't verify which one of the two if he can't remember which one of the two that he saw making out with their uncle, either Latifah or Chastity, I would say it's Chastity just because of her connection with them. They seem pretty close. And then next we have Tristan. He was covered pretty prevalently in the last video, but we'll just run it through it again. He was sexually abused by multiple family members. He is the son of Unique. He is also accused Tasiki of sexually assaulting him, but when he confronted her, she just said it was no big deal. I think this has affected him pretty drastically though. He says that because of this, he's tried to commit suicide 5 times. And if you want more details on him, you can just go to my last video. I only have like 3 videos up, so it'll be easy to find. That wraps up the current generation. As we move towards the future, it's clear that the next generation of Malones is already feeling the effects of this trauma. As I mentioned earlier, Mikey